You're listening to Worshipology with Kurtis Parks, a biblical, practical, and spiritual conversation about living and leading worship. Let's lean into today's episode.
Well, hey, thanks so much for listening to this week's Worshipology episode. Today, I'm talking to a guy that I've probably known for a decade or so. We met when I was a worship leader up in Washington, D.C. at National Community Church. And Christian Nuckels is a songwriter, worship pastor. He's now out at Battle Creek. We're going to talk about all things worship and multi-site and even dive into some hard parts of his journey that have really led to the worship leader he is today. So Christian Nuckels, welcome to the podcast, bro.
Dude, thank you so much for having me on here, man. This is really fun. It's great to catch up with you.
Oh, absolutely, man. Now, we met, I know you were leading worship at a church in the Washington, D.C. area.
Yes.
And we just connected. I think it was actually, did you meet Sarah or did your wife meet Sarah? I can't remember. I was trying to think about this earlier today. How did we first connect, man?
Yeah, so your oldest kid, and my youngest kid were in like preschool together. And
that's right.
I think I met Sarah at some kind of a,
like a parent-teacher kind of thing?
Yes. And she mentioned, yeah, my husband is actually a worship pastor too. And I was like, dude, we should totally hang out sometime. So that's how we got connected and then just got to hang out. And I was at Grace Community Church, which is in Arlington, Virginia. And you were at NCC. And then, you moved down to Nashville and left me all alone. And
and then life happened.
And
you moved out
happened.
to Oklahoma.
Yeah, man.
Well, dude, I know we've gotten to write songs together.
Mm-hmm.
We've gotten to lead worship together. You stayed at my house. I mean, I feel like we're family on this podcast. So we're gonna jump into some good stuff, man.
For real.
But for our listeners, just for some context, man, why don't you kind of tell a little bit of your story? How did you first get into ministry, worship leading? What's the Christian Nuckels story in a nutshell, man?
Okay, in a nutshell, and I'm a talker, so I'm going to keep this short. But I grew up in Texas. My dad was a music minister, and it was the early '80s Southern Baptist church world. My dad got fired from a church when I was about 6 years old. We were living out in the middle of nowhere in this small town in Texas. And, he was at the First Baptist Church there, and I guess he just kind of got let go one day, and we lived in the church parsonage, so it's like, hey, you're fired and your family is homeless. So It was not cool. Yeah, it was pretty rough. And we moved back to my parents' hometown of Denton, Texas at that point, and that's where I grew up the rest of my grown-up years. But, from that point on, my dad basically vowed to never work in full-time music ministry or full-time ministry, really, ever again. And when I was 12, I started playing guitar. I'd been singing since I was old enough to stand on a church stage. Started writing songs pretty quickly after that, just kind of as a self-teaching of how to play the guitar. I would make stuff up and make up lyrics and learn stuff on the radio. And I told God, I was like, you know what? I really feel like I could do something where I use music to glorify the Lord and lead people to Jesus, but I'm never working for a church. So,
wow.
Yeah. So fast forward to my high school years. When I was 17, I helped start a Christian ska band in 1999, all the way into my college days. And then, I got married in 2004 to my beautiful college sweetheart. And she was like, you'd make a great worship pastor. And I said, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. The whole dad issues and problems. That's not what I'm going to do. And she was like, you know what? It sounds like you just want to be a rock star, and that you will take these gifts that God's given you and you want to use them, but you don't want to serve his church, And it's kind of like it's kind of like when your dad gives you a gift and you take it and you say, I'm only going to use it this way. And I said, okay, I'll do this. Lord, if there is a crazy pastor that would hire this spiky-haired punk rocker Mohawk guy to be his worship pastor part-time, then I'll give it a try. And a friend of a friend was planting a church and needed a worship pastor, and I started bivocationally doing that.
So you guys started at a church plant in Denton, Texas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that was kind of like your first ministry job. What did it look like? Like what led to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I mean, the big thing that happened before I went into full-time ministry is my dad took his own life. And in April of 2009, I was getting ready to go into full-time ministry and put my resume out there. Wow. And then I had to grapple with the fact that I got a call and that my dad was gone in an instant and he had committed suicide. And in that moment, I had to surrender. I had to surrender to my calling, and I had to stay focused on the voice of truth that God had wanted me to do this, and that I'm not my father, and that I don't deal with the depression and anger that he dealt with, and
wow.
And so God really, in a time where Satan could have robbed me of that, of the joy of following that calling, God used that horrific and tragic time to confirm that calling. And that's wow. when, and so in the months that followed that, and a month later, my son was born. My son, Ryland, was born. And wow. I just felt this sense of responsibility to leave a different legacy to my family. And so, at the beginning of 2010, in January 2010, I got hired by a church in Annapolis, Maryland. And that was a Southern Baptist church, Weems Creek Baptist Church. And so I moved there and moved my family from Denton, Texas to Annapolis, Maryland to be the worship pastor at a church of about 200 people. And I served there for 4.5 years and did every single job you could do except for preach, basically, and youth group. So served in that church for 4.5 years. And then that's when I moved to Arlington, Virginia, in 2014 to serve at Grace Community Church, which was a mobile, very seeker-sensitive church. So I went from a very relatively traditional Southern Baptist church to a truly interdenominational staff. We had people that
which is really something in that area, because I know just from living there for 7 years, and I mean, a lot of churches are very much melting pots, like at National Community Church, literally within one row, you'd see a Catholic next to somebody who has never been to church, next to a person raised Methodist, Presbyterian, then Pentecostal. I mean, all in the same row. So that's definitely a pretty unique area, and the churches in that area around DC are very reflective of that. That's cool.
That's true. Yeah, and during my time at Grace is when I started to write and release records, like worship music. We started out with our main campus at a middle school in Arlington, and then we launched a second campus in Falls Church. At one point, we also had a campus down in the district in a nightclub, basically, that one of our church members owned.
Nice.
So like on Tuesday nights, there was a church service in a bar, basically, nightclub thing, and then we had a little chapel in another area of Arlington. So I was working out of 4 or 5 different venues during my time there in a mobile multi-site church where your broadcast campus is portable. It was very crazy. Wow. But it really taught me the value of appreciating people from different denominational backgrounds. I had a good friend that was on staff there that was from an AG background, a good friend that was from a Methodist background. I was kind of the Baptist guy, and
sounds like the Avengers, but with denominations.
Exactly. Yeah. And so after about 4 years there, I felt the Lord moving me into a different ministry and just felt called to seek something new, and found a job here in Tulsa at Battle Creek Church. And Battle Creek is a large multi-site mega church with 6 campuses here in the Tulsa area. We also have a campus in Amman, Jordan, and we have one in Egypt as well.
Whoa.
So it's kind of a crazy. That's kind of a crazy thing.
That's cool.
I serve at one of the satellite campuses. I'm not at the broadcast location, but we have 6 worship pastors that all serve together and collaborate on a weekly basis, and we all report to the lead worship guy who isn't necessarily on stage on the weekend. He is more of a director and a mentor to us, and So it's a really fun environment to work in, highly collaborative, very creative and cutting edge, and it always keeps me on my toes, man. So it's a fun place to work. Yeah, but I've had to learn a lot here. So multi-site is
well,
crazy.
let's talk about that a little bit. Like, as you've kind of been in a couple of different multi-site contexts, one in DC, now you're in Tulsa, you're working not just with one campus team and one campus leadership, but really trying to collaborate with different expressions of a church. What are some of the things that you've learned in that multi-site environment? Because, I mean, that's kind of close to my heart being at NCC. When I was there, we had 8 campuses. They all had a little bit different flavor. You'd have some stuff that was like right downtown DC. Then you'd have some things closer to the Maryland border. We had a campus all the way out in Gainesville, which is about an hour drive outside of DC. A lot more families, a lot more like elderly folks that were out there. So just kind of a different overall, flavor within those campuses. What was it like at Grace and then now at Battle Creek? What are some of those multi-site things that you guys have learned along the way?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've learned is you have to realize that each location is going to be attended by a unique individual group of people, and that you can take steps toward making it feel like one church in multiple places. But you're going to have a different campus pastor at each of those locations, most likely, a different leadership team at each of those locations, a different worship team. And there are churches, some of them very, very large and very affluent, that go to the extreme to make it every single location is exactly the same as much as possible. And and I think that in systems, that is a smart thing to do. I think that in production technology and in training and onboarding systems, even having maybe a common playlist from which you draw and being able to speak into that, I think those are all good things. I do think that there is a lot of value in autonomy at the campus level, and I think that it helps you serve that individual group of people better. So, for example, at Grace, the broadcast location was in a large middle school auditorium, like a theatrical stage kind of thing. But we also had a Falls Church campus, which was in a high school auditorium, and it had a much lower attendance, and we did more acoustic worship in that campus, a more reverent almost style of worship in that campus. And then if we had a chapel service in our Ballston's chapel, that's a whole different sort of feel as well. And so it wasn't necessarily the full band, lights, cameras, and action. It was more of a intimate, stripped down, a worship style. At Battle Creek, all 6 of our campuses are much more alike than what we did at Grace. I'd say that all 6 of our campuses and all 6 of our rooms are very similar, but our downtown campus has a much higher attendance from the Hispanic community and the African American community. And so their worship flavor is more gospel, and they also have bilingual worship stuff available there. So, because it serves that community. Whereas if you go to our South Tulsa campus and my campus, very similar in their demographics. Our Jinx campus is the same kind of way. So, then our Midtown campus is where a lot more of the affluent people go to church, and so they like a little bit more of a I don't want to say traditional, but a little bit less on the cutting edge style, right? It looks more. You could
probably
like
get away with hymns
church.
there or something, hymn
reinventions,
a couple decades
like
ago. Yeah, exactly.
So it's one of those things where each of us worship pastors all have to have a common respect for each other, and we all have to be on the same page with the vision of our senior pastor. That's really what it comes down to. You have to be on the same page as your senior pastor. We serve his vision, and his vision is to not be homogenous across our campuses. It's to be as alike as possible, especially in the excellence expectation. But then, you know what, dude? If Owasso, like my campus is in Owasso, and if I like House of Miracles by Brandon Lake, and some other guy who's wrong, by the way, doesn't like that song as much, well, maybe I play it, 3 times as much as he does, right?
Yeah.
there are songs that I write that we only play at this campus. That we do a lot more original music at this campus because I'm just always writing worship music. So I think having that freedom is very important to the typical worship pastor who is a creative person. And if you make that box that they're supposed to color in too small, it can be frustrating. So.
It's really cool that you there's a couple things that I just kind of want to pull out from what you just said. You were talking about the idea of, and I would call this, you either have the clone way of doing multi-site or you have the super autonomous culture-driven way of doing it. So, the clone way is basically the copy and paste. Hey, this is what has really worked for us, and we're just going to kind of copy and paste it in different parts of town and see if it works. And I mean, you have obviously a lot of churches that do that really well. I would almost put like an elevation kind of in that, where it's like their brand, their style, wherever they go, it's going to kind of reflect, what's happening down in Charlotte.
Yes.
And then you have other ways of doing multi-site that is kind of more driven by the culture of where you're at, right? And so, I've kind of seen this in Hillsong campuses. Like if you go to Hillsong, New York, it looks pretty different than Hillsong, LA or Hillsong, Paris. And granted, they're global when they do that, but it does reflect the city or the area that they're in.
Yeah, sure.
And I would even say, like, in the style that, we did at National Community Church, it was we're trying to figure out how to do this both. So if you're listening and you're a multi-site worship leader, A, would love to hear some of your best practices, but B, I think the big conversation is always that DNA versus autonomy. How do we celebrate the unique communities within the larger body? And then when you're a worship pastor at a church like that, we're going to have things that build up each campus individually, but then we're also going to have things that build the sum of all campuses and kind of reflect a larger vision. So when you said, hey, we're each kind of taking the vision of the lead pastor and implementing it in the communities that we find ourselves in, I really, really thought that was a valuable piece because, you can't have, if you have a 7-campus church with multi-sites, you can't have 7 different visions. I mean, obviously then you're going to be going in different directions. So kind of what's that common denominator that pulls all of you together? So for Battle Creek Church, it would be, hey, what are the things at all of your different campuses when I walk in, I can be like, oh yeah, this is Battle Creek Church, and finding those things that are almost like non-negotiables. And I would ask you this, just as a worship pastor, what are do you guys, you're only at one campus, or are you kind of jumping around from campus to campus to kind of keep it fresh, or what does that look like for you, Christian?
Yeah. Each of our worship pastors serves at a specific campus. We report to the campus pastor of that campus. So, so my boss is not the central worship pastor. It's the campus pastor of our Owasso campus, and my fellow workers, in the ministry. I consider that primarily to be my campus staff. Now, I'll say this: some of the things that tie our church campuses together is visual. We do a lot of, all of our branding is common, right? All of our color schemes and stuff like that. Even our kids' areas all look almost exactly the same in the theming and construction. But our venues are completely different because we've basically grown as a church into multi-site as a result of other churches wanting us to come in and partner with them and them becoming a Battle Creek campus. And so we take over a building that was another church, right? So it was a pre-existing church building. So let
me pause you right there.
Sure.
Because that's a whole nother side of multi-site, is when you kind of do these what would you call it? Revitalization, or, you're coming in and partnering with the church. So in those instances, have you guys partnered with churches that have had like their congregations blend with your congregation, or is it just the building?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of both, depending on the situation. There have been a couple of different situations where the congregations of that church did blend in with our church. I think the majority of the time it's been, hey, we're closing down, we're selling our building. Do you want to buy it and turn it into a campus? That kind of thing. And our pastor just having a vision to reach all the different areas of Tulsa, and God just providing those opportunities and conversations to happen. But as a result, one of the things that's great about one of the largest multi-site churches, Life Church, they have a lot of control over their venues because they build them all to be the same, pretty much. Yeah. And that's really, really great, because that means if I need to go run sound at another campus, well, they're going to have the exact same kind of thing, right? And for us, it's been a challenge. That's been a production challenge, because if I were to go down to our downtown campus, for example, they have a different soundboard than we do because they're in a different life cycle and of gear, and they run tracks a little differently than we do. So that's another thing. All of us worship pastors have the freedom to run tracks however much we want, or however much we want, however little we want, and however we want. Yeah. So my Ableton workflow might look completely different than our South Tulsa campus and our BA campus. So yeah, I mean, it's just one of those interesting things that on the production side, multi-site church, I mean, that could be a whole other episode, man.
I know. But and that's the interesting thing is, like, you just talked about Ableton. Like, it was an interesting, I guess, season in my life. And I'm seeing multi-site become more a part of the conversation again. Here we are 3 years removed from COVID, almost. And so I've definitely been hearing multi-site come up a lot. And even in our conversations here at Destination, we're talking about, possible expansion in the future and dreaming and praying about that. But I would say this, like at NCC, I was worship director. We had 8 campuses. All of those campuses had a worship leader or a worship pastor at them. And so my role was really to bring people together. So I would kind of bounce between the campuses and just do a pulse check on each one. Hey, how's the team doing? Hey, how are you doing as a worship leader? And then we would all come together once or twice a week to pray, to cast vision, to kind of hear larger vision, even to pick songs that, hey, what are the 10 to 20 songs over this next quarter that we can all be doing? And not necessarily the same style, but even our own style. But I will say this, like, there are those things that as a worship director of multiple campuses, you kind of say, well, hey, not everybody has to use Ableton, but everybody should be playing with a click. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like the standards, like trying to get those standards across the board, so where it may be a different flavor at each campus, but you're going to experience the same quality line.
Yes.
And I think that's such a key distinction, man. And so, you could jump from one campus to the next as a worship leader and feel like, oh, this is the same church. And if it doesn't, then you ask yourself, all right, where are the areas that we need to maybe renovate or tighten up?
Yeah, it's true. And all of our venues, so our main campus is the Broken Arrow location. Broken Arrow, Oklahoma is a suburb of Tulsa, and it's much, much, much larger than the other 5 campuses here in the Tulsa area. So, for example, my campus runs 650 on a Sunday, something like that, whereas the Broken Arrow campus runs 4,000 or something, like 3,000 on a Sunday. And so in each of our, like my venue is infinitely smaller than the Broken Arrow Worship Center, and so their level of production and their tools that are available to them, even in personnel and staff, is vastly different than what I do. However, when they launched our campus, they set it up to be a micro expression of what they do at BA. And then the same can be said for all the other 5 campuses, so that when you go into those campuses, and I'm just going to describe real quickly like what it's like at our Battle Creek campuses. When you walk into the worship center, you're going to see LED lights, like modern intelligent lighting that's going to be moving during the music. It's not, and then the lights are dimmed in the room, right? So it's a modern setting. You're not going to see at one campus they keep the lights on the whole time and it's stained glass windows. It's not that different, right? It's all going to be that more, I guess, what we would consider modern worship style. And yeah, we all run tracks on every song. So like as needed, but some campuses are a little bit more tracks dependent, and their workflows dictate that. than mine is. And like at BA, they run their tracks in a completely different, BA is short for Broken Arrow. At BA, they run their tracks a very different way than we do, but we're all running tracks, and they're all seamlessly flowing between each other. And it's not like one campus has banjo and accordion when the others have rock bands, right? We all have like full rock bands, with vocalists, multiple vocalists on stage. We all have similar, dare I say, even like dress codes in a way. And so that when you go to one of these campuses, it definitely, I think we've really struck the balance well of it feeling like a Battle Creek campus, no matter which one you go to, even though our buildings could not be more different than each other.
I like that, man. And I think, as we kind of look to the future, the beautiful thing about the multi-site model at large is really you go big by going small. I think coming out of this COVID season, so many people are kind of looking for maybe a church where they can connect a little bit easier. And so, of course, when you're meeting in smaller venues, it's just way easier to meet people. It's way easier to connect and find places to plug in and serve. And so I don't think multi-site is a thing of the past. I actually think I see it coming back, maybe in a different way. But I think this conversation has been so helpful because there's multiple ways to do it. And then, finding yourself, Christian, as one of a team of many, what are some best practices when it comes to that, of being a part of a larger team, a larger collective of worship leaders and worship pastors that serve a vision? What are some best practices maybe within the team dynamic?
I think one of the biggest ones is connecting regularly. I can't imagine working in an environment like this without us getting together on a weekly basis, or at least every other week or so. When we were separated during COVID and all locked down for those few months or however long, and by the way, Oklahoma, we experienced the pandemic in a very different way than I think they would in like DC and places like that, because our shutdown was much, much shorter and less invasive.
Wide open spaces.
Right. When the population density is like a fraction of DC, it's a lot easier to, But I mean, like you said at NCC, when you were the worship director there, you guys got together once a week and you helped connect those worship leaders together. We do the exact same thing. Every week we go to the BA campus, the main campus. We all get together. We talk through what's coming up. We talk about how Sunday went. We get lunch together. We hang out. We eat chicken together, and we get to just we get to be brothers together. We've walked through thick and thin of just crazy turnover, of attacks spiritually, things in our personal lives that we've dealt with, and we've been there for each other after these several years. And I'll tell you one thing, man, there were some times in my early days at this church that were very, very difficult to walk through, and that group of worship pastors was one of the only reasons I was able to stick it through, man. Like stick it out. It was so. So I think that's vital. Having a connection point just to help you understand you are not alone. One of the greatest strengths of being multi-site is that you're not alone in what you're doing. There are other people at another place that do your same job and love you and want you to win. So I just think having a regular connecting time each week, also just having a mutual respect for each other, always believing the best for each other, and not necessarily competing with each other. I think that for the worship pastors, because we collaborate in a creative way, we're able to check that competitive nature at the door sometimes a little easier. But yeah, I think.
Well, listen, most of the time we've been talking about teams in the aspect of like your worship band, like your team being, your drummer, your bass player, your singers, and of course, worship leaders leading that up. But I think there's such a beautiful thing when you've got a team of worship pastors working together at a church where you can lift each other's arms. And I mean, man, every Moses needs an Aaron and a Hur. And I think, you just gave some great best practices, not just for worship leaders who collaborate together, but even worship staffs. And I mean, church staffs, to work together and realize like, man, we're on the same team. Yeah. I think we're going to win together way better than we're going to compete apart from one another. So
the last thing I was going to say, and this is just one last thing, man, one of the most wonderful and unique things that we do at Battle Creek that I feel is a strength of our multi-site nature is that several times a year. I want to say 3 times a year. We have a huge worship night at our main campus where all of our campuses come together, and all of our worship pastors form the Battle Creek Collective, where, our downtown worship pastor, Ryan, and our Jenks worship pastor, Ty, are both killer drummers, but they both also sing really, really, they're amazing singers. You don't want me to play drums, Kurtis. I am not a good drummer, right? But we've got some guys that are really good keyboard players. I'm a guitar guy and a vocalist, I play electric guitar and acoustic. And so we all will, somebody will play bass, somebody will play keys, somebody will play drums. We all come together to form the Voltron of the Battle Creek Collective, right? So
nice.
There's something special about playing music with each other that binds you together in almost a band of brothers kind of way. And we get to live that out several times a year, because you got to work through stuff, right? And you got to lean on each other in a different way when you're doing that. So I would recommend, whether even if you're in different roles, like maybe you are an outreach coordinator, or maybe you're a student pastor, man, try and find something once or twice a year that all the student pastors are working on together, like maybe student camp, or all the outreach people are working on together, like a giant outreach event, because it will allow you to collaborate in a fresh way and stay bound together and be one church together.
I love that. And I would even say, just kind of as a side thought, man, like finding people in your city, in your community, other worship pastors to just get with, collaborate with, meet for coffee. There's so much value in just seeing that we're not just these silos of churches, but man, if we're all preaching the same Jesus, preaching the same gospel, we're on the same team, right?
Absolutely.
And so, man, I think there's just a lot of value in that right there, Christian. Hey, man, listen, couple minutes left here. I would love to know, one thing I've been asking every interview and podcast this year is just, man, what is the Holy Spirit speaking to you for this season, for this year? What is he telling you? And is there something in there that you feel like, for the church at large, for the body of Christ, hey, man, let's lean into that.
I think the big drum that I've been banging on for the last, 6 to 9 months, really, in my own personal ministry journey, is this. I feel like the Holy Spirit is enlightening me to a very basic truth that I may have overlooked or gotten away from in it. And I'm sad that it took so long for me to really grasp onto this. And that is that we as pastors, as worship leaders, we are in the disciple-making business. We're not in the entertainment business. We're not in the production business. We're not in the, even in the music business, right? It's all a context for making disciples. And when Jesus was giving the Great Commission, he didn't say, "Hey guys, God's given me all authority in heaven and on earth, and so therefore go out and rock people's faces on Sunday mornings." You know what I'm saying? Therefore,
that does need to be a T-shirt, though.
Yeah,
it does need to be a T-shirt.
Yeah, it does. Therefore, go and make great Ableton sessions. No, he says, go make disciples. And so, 100 years ago, or maybe even 50 years ago, maybe it was a handbell choir that was a context for making disciples. Or maybe you're in a small country church with 50 people in it, and you're the worship pastor / youth pastor / janitor / kids pastor. Those are all just a context for making disciples. And so when you have, maybe you're in a large church that has a lot of people helping with front of house production. Maybe you've got maybe you've got 5 people that all do Pro Presenter, that all do your visual operator's job. If you aren't at least checking in with those people and talking to those people about their spiritual walk and their daily life, and letting them know, like, hey, man, I know you work for the road crews and it's about to snow like a crazy storm. I just want you to know I'm praying for you, Or, hey, man, I know that your niece had a baby last night. I just want to let you know I'm praying for that family. I don't know her personally, but I'm celebrating with you guys right now. Like, we're disciple makers, man. And I think a lot of times worship pastors get lazy and we focus on Sunday morning so much that we don't even care about making disciples. And that's just the honest truth. Like, and that's honestly a confession moment, Kurtis. Like, but think about it. What's harder? Sitting in your office and crafting a worship set, or sitting at someone's hospital bed and praying with them before they go into surgery, right?
Bro, I think that's a challenge just issued for all of us, man. The Great Commission is all about discipleship. And so if that's what Jesus said as our Great Commission, man, I think we've got to take that seriously in the context that we're in. We've got to be focused on making disciples, loving people, and loving God, man. Thank you so much for just spending some time with us, Christian. Awesome, dude. And we're going to put some just links to the music you've been writing and releasing in our show notes. Excited for everything that's coming out of Battle Creek and everything that you're writing, man. It sounds so good.
Dude, thank you, man. I love you, bro.
You've been listening to Worshipology with Kurtis Parks. To learn more and to find resources for worship leaders and teams, you can visit kurtisparks.com.